Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Samuel Gregory, and on this channel we talk about all things front end and accessibility. If you're a fan of the channel, then you'll obviously notice this isn't my normal location. I'm actually traveling right now and I'm sort of in a mobile setup around my parents' house. This week I've been streaming my progress on putting together my agency's website over on twitch.tv/fakesamgregory, and in the stream I actually encountered interactions within Pinegrow which I hadn't encountered before, and I sort of fumbled my way through it and sort of learned what it takes to actually create interactions in Pinegrow. And I actually think very powerful, and I think that Webflow have really got something to learn from Pinegrow when it comes to actually creating interactions. Unfortunately that episode didn't come out at the quality that I want, so I thought I'd do a quick episode kind of running you through the interactions in Pinegrow, and we're going to make my menu just kind of appear on the page as you might expect it to, but we're going to do it in an accessible way. See on my website that this isn't the final website by any stretch of the imagination. It's just I've been streaming my progress and we're just on creating the style guide at the moment. So what I want to do is essentially when we hit this button here that we have the menu kind of pop up and fade in as I would kind of expect it to. I'm not sure if this is going to be the final implementation, but it's a good case study for us to look at Pinegrow interactions. So first of all, you want to click on this button up here and you should be able to enable interactions there. If you don't, then you're probably not subscribed to the Pinegrow interactions. So if you have it enabled, then you should be able to click enable, and what this does is essentially adds the JavaScript, which is very light, and adds the JavaScript to your page so you can actually progress on with animations. So I've actually created the HTML already for this page. You can see I've got the header there. And actually if we look here, we have my mobile navigation, which is simply position fixed, and it's kind of just kind of taking up the whole screen, and I've used transform to position it 100% to the left. So if I make this 0, you'll see the menu kind of comes in here. The other thing I want to do is set the opacity, which, okay, opacity, and we set that to 0. Essentially what I want to do is have the menu kind of fade in and then fade out, and there's a few little tricks that we need to encounter here, but most importantly we actually need to set the area HTML attribute to true and false depending on whether we can see the menu or not. So the first thing I want to do now is click on our menu, and we've got our interactions enabled, and we want to add an interaction. Now first of all we just want to name the interaction, so this is just going to be open menu, and then we need to set what the trigger is, which is currently a click on this element here, which is a button. Of course you can have a few different elements here, but we're only interested in clicking on it. Now the target one is nice and interesting, and I think a lot better than Webflow, is that you click on the target and then we just want to select it on the page. And then we just go to our mobile menu here and click done. Now here's where we add the animation. So we want to add a custom animation. There's some presets here which we can play around with, and I'd like to explore those in more detail, but I want to go with something a bit more manual for now, just so that I have control over it. And you'll see down the bottom of the page that this kind of timeline here has popped up. Now this is the element here, and on this menu we can sort of add multiple transitions on this simple animation here. So you see I've accidentally just clicked into the timeline there, and if I just actually remove this and do it properly, so when I click add here, it adds something to the timeline, and I can either set tween or set. Tween is something, again, is something we're not going to touch on in this episode because we want to keep it quite simple, but what we're interested in is set, so we're going to set a property. The position is where in this timeline does this property get set, and we want it to set right from the beginning, and we want to add a property there. Now the first thing we want to do is kind of move this this menu to the center of the screen. We've already demonstrated how we've done that, and that's using the transform property. So if we type that transform, and we want to set that to 0. The other thing we want to do is actually add another timeline and set the opacity to 1. We actually want to transition between these properties. Well, more specifically, transition the opacity. So if we knock back into here and scroll down to the transitions, you can obviously do all of these through the timeline using the tween, but I find you get a lot more performance if you just rely on CSS to do the transitions rather than JavaScript. So that's why we add the transition here of the opacity. Then what we should find is that when we play the animation, then we'll get a nice fade in here. Here we can set some durations and delays, and we can enable it on mobile or desktop depending on what your preferences are, kind of similar to what you have on Webflow. And the other thing to note here is that we want the animation to restart on play, meaning we want it to kind of be infinite, as it were. We want to keep enabling we want to enable us to keep clicking on this open menu. So the other thing now is that we have this close button, and we need to bind a interaction to that. So once again, we click on interactions and we can say close menu. Trigger obviously being click on that, and then the target being the select on page, the mobile menu. And we want another custom animation here, so we get a brand new timeline, and here's where we can add our animations. So we need to think about what we want to do here, because if we immediately set the transform property to 0, if we immediately select that, then we won't see the beautiful fade out. So if I create my timeline here and we set the opacity to, sorry, it's tween, opacity to 0 to fade it out, we know that it takes 0.3 seconds for that to fade out. So now we move our timeline to roughly when that's going to end, maybe for good measure set it a little bit afterwards. We then want to set a property of we want to add a timeline there and set a property of our transform to 100%, which moves it, and you can see that hopefully, I mean, 0.3 is probably around there anyway. That's probably 0.5 here, so we can just play around with these. But hopefully, if we save this and then preview it in the browser, you can see that we have that beautiful fading in. The biggest kind of selling factor, I think, for me on these transitions is we don't just want to be affecting a CSS, because for an accessible website, an interactive JavaScript website to be accessible, we need to let those accessibility users know what is happening on the screen. So if we if we take a look at the way that our menu is set up, you'll see that we've added an area hidden attribute here, and it's currently set to true in its default state. So when we open the menu, we want to say area hidden false. So when we knock back into our timeline here, we add a new timeline property, and what we can do is set add property, custom property, and in here, if we type attr area hidden and click OK, then we can set that property to false. Similarly, if we go into our close menu, then we can once again add a property here, set the attribute area hidden, and we want to set this property to true. So once again, we save that and preview it in our browser, but this time I want to inspect the code, and we take a look at our mobile menu, which is here. You can see area hidden is true, but when we open it, it sets it to false, and vice versa. True, false. So you can see why now this suddenly is leaps and bounds ahead of something like Webflow, because we're actually able to manipulate HTML properties, which makes our JavaScript websites more accessible. So I'm going to be investigating this more as I build out my timeline. If you want to see that journey, then I stream fairly regularly on twitch.tv/fakesamgregory if you want to support me over there. So that'll do it for this episode. So do let me know in the comments what you think of Pinegrow interactions, or whether you think they're better or worse than Webflows. If you want to see more of this content, then do let me know by liking this episode. And if you want to support my teachings on this channel, then do head on over to patreon.com/fakesamgregory, where you can support the channel for as little as £3 a month. Until next time, happy no coding.